Well, good morning. My name is Adam Long, one of the pastors here. I want to welcome you. If I've not met you, I'd love to meet you sometime, but grateful to be here to worship our Lord and Savior and King. We are in a series called Knowing God. And so we were looking first at the foundational aspects of this, and then now we're transitioning into the mysterious attributes of God. So this morning, we're going to be looking at God's attributes as eternal and transcendent. Now, I got to admit, it sounds pretty deep, a bit philosophical, right? And I have to admit as well that I was wrestling with, how do I preach this? How do I communicate this? I mean, this is under the category of the incommunicable attributes of God. So how am I supposed to communicate with that which is hard to actually understand? And so earlier this week, I was chatting with a pastor friend of mine, kind of sharing the wrestle of how to communicate this. And so he suggested to me that I just preach an unending sermon and long periods of silence. Experience the eternal. I don't know how transcendent that will be. But to be honest, that I think that for many of us, when we think of God, we almost assume that he's eternal and transcendent. That we wonder, what difference does it actually make? And the more that I've studied and wrestled through this, I would say it makes a world of difference. That first, it helps us to lean into wonder and worship. And it also taps into, I believe, the deeper longings of our heart. I love the way that A.W. Tozer put it. And so in the book, The Knowledge of the Holy, which you've not read it, really should check it out. So he says, the yearning to know what cannot be known, to comprehend the incomprehensible, to touch and taste the unapproachable, arises from the image of God and the nature of man. Deep calleth unto deep, and though polluted and landlocked by the mighty disaster theologians call the fall, the soul senses its origin and longs to return to its source. I love that line, that the soul senses its origin and longs to return to its source. And so in many ways, our hope is to have in this series, and really just in life itself, in knowing God, is that our view of God would grow. And as it grows in the mystery and who he is, that also it would grow in wonder and worship as we follow him. We're going to be looking at Exodus 3 to frame our time and this topic. And so again, I want to look at these verses. So starting in verse 9, it says, "And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Now, many of you probably know the story of the Israelites in Egypt, and they've been there in captivity for 400 years. And so they're under the oppressive rule of the Egyptians. They're crying out to God in anguish. And in chapter 2, you hear, or you see that it says God heard, and he looked, and he was concerned. And then you have this character, Moses, who's actually been kicked out of Egypt. He's in this area called Midian, which is northwest Saudi Arabia, in the wilderness. And there, you have this burning bush, the voice of God appears to him, and then God commissions him to go and rescue the Israelites out of Egypt. And then Moses responds. And his response is with this doubtful question of, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And I think in many ways connecting to our doubtful questions, where we might even say, who am I for whatever God might have for you or wherever you might be at in your life. Now, in some way, I think this makes sense, because here you have Moses, who's an outcast and a fugitive. He's one who has been rejected by the Egyptian royalty, which is where he grew up. And he also is one who is rejected by the Israelites, where he actually tried of his own strength to rescue them. And so here he is like an immigrant, a refugee in a foreign land. He is one who was once a prince, but he's now a nobody. He is a shepherd tending a flock on the far side of the wilderness. So in many ways, this would make sense. His doubts, his questions. Who am I to be able to do this? And so moving on in this passage, in verse 12, we see that God responds, says, and God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your forefathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. This is profound because here is that in response to a question, God actually gives himself. He says, I will be with you. Now, God could have easily spoken to Moses' doubts. He could have easily told Moses, he could have said, Moses, with this like pumped up motivational speech, you can do it. You were raised in the Egyptian royal household and educated in the royal courts, and you know the royal family, and you grew up with that hard-headed Pharaoh, plus you speak Hebrew, and you know the Jewish customs, and lastly, you've been shepherding the sheep for the last 40 years, and you know how you're able to shepherd my people out of Egypt. But that's not what God did. In response to doubtful question, he gave his very self to him. Moses, who called himself a foreigner in a foreign land, has the God of the universe appear to him and say, I will be with you. And in contrast to the pantheon of Egyptian gods or the pagan gods of the ancient Near East, where generally those gods were fickle and capricious, here you have a God who says, I will be with you. Now, we can imagine that Moses and maybe his confidence is starting to grow, and he's thinking, before he tried to rescue the Israelites out of his own strength, now he can maybe actually rescue the Israelites out of God's strength. But yet still wondering, and so he asked the questions like, well, what is your name? And actually, even some scholars would say, kind of deeper to this question, is what is the meaning of your name? And so in verse 14, here God says, I am who I am. In the Hebrew, it's Eyeh Asher Eyeh, which means whatever I am, I will be. I am has sent you. The divine name of God, often theologians call the Tetragrammaton, is the four words representing the I am, the one who is, and the one who is to come. Great depth, but yet still mystery. Now, you might know that we refer to this divine name as Yahweh. And so you might wonder, well, is it I am, or is it Yahweh, or is it I am who I am? What exactly is it? And so verse 15 kind of helps speak a little bit more into that. It says, God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, which is Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. The name you shall call me from generation to generation. Now, most simply put, the best way to kind of understand this aspect of I am versus Yahweh is that I am is in the first person, where Yahweh is actually in the third person, which means he is. And so when we say Yahweh, we're really saying he is. He's the God who is. And the very mystery and the depth of all of that. Now, as some of you might know, so the Jews, they call this the preeminent name, and it describes God's essence and his glory, and they believed in reverence to God that they would not mention the name itself. And so they would either say Adonai, or they would say Hashem, which means the name. And the reason why they actually say that is because the word forever right there could be, or sometimes is taken as concealed. So that the name that is concealed. But many scholars would say it's actually a better fit to say that it's forever. And it's not a name that is being concealed, because this is the name that God is revealing to his people. And even in the following verse of 16, where it says, "Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me." And so this is the name, the divine name that has been given to us. This is the name that God actually already used previously with others. Yet it wasn't described. It wasn't explained. And so here there's a deeper depth of the heart behind this name, behind the God who is and who is with them. I love the way the Dutch Reformed theologian Herman Bavinck puts it. He says, "He will be what he was for the patriarchs, what he is now, and will remain. He will be everything to and for his people. It is not a new and strange God who comes to them by Moses, but the God of the fathers, the unchangeable one, the faithful one, the eternally self-consistent one, who never leaves or forsakes his people, but always again seeks out and saves his own. He is unchangeable in his grace, in his love, in his assistance, who will be what he is because he is always himself." Now that's still pretty deep. I had to read it like a couple times to understand it. But we have a deep God who is eternal and who is transcendent. And that particularly in the context where Moses is hearing this, of the fickle and capricious gods that are distant, here is a God who can be relied on, who can be trusted in. This is God who is eternal, who was never caused or created by something, is not dependent on anyone or anything, and is true and is faithful. So imagine how Moses receives this and how he experiences first seeing this burning bush that's not being burnt up, hearing the voice of God speaking to him, revealing a deeper depth of who God is to him. The one who's feeling like an outcast and a reject, who's an immigrant in a foreign land as like a refugee. And here God says, "I am the great I am. I am the one who is with you." Because what we see here is that greater is our God, greater is our faith. And so having a greater God, then he has a greater faith to be a part of God's mission upon him. So as I was thinking about it, this image kind of came to my mind. So here I'm hiking with my youngest, Aiden, who's now 15, so it'll be a little bit harder to try to do that. And now, for some of you parents who maybe remember that season of life, or maybe you're in that season of life, you remember those moments where you go to the playground, and they could run around for hours, and they're not exhausted. They're having a blast. And then you go hiking with them, and in about 5 minutes into the hike, it's like, my feet are tired. Are we there yet? Where are we going? And so that's why you bring candy with you. And so here you go, a little more candy. We're going to get some more candy in about all the way over there. And so often the case, what happens is carry me. And so usually, put them up on my shoulder or something like that. And I find that in many ways, this is like our relationship with God. That our strength is actually found in his strength. Our direction is found in him. And that he's the one who carries us. I love how Deuteronomy 33 puts it. It says, "Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him. For he shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders." Isn't that beautiful? That we as the beloved are resting between his shoulders as he carries us, however he may. And that's what it means, is that greater is our God, greater is our faith. That's why we want to learn and study and dive and wrestle with the mysterious attributes of God, so that it would lead us to greater wonder and worship of who he is and whatever he has for us. So speaking of God as eternal and transcendent, I want to highlight 3 things related to this. So we're going to do some theology here, and so hopefully I won't lose you on this. So first off is that as eternal and transcendent God is not dependent on anything or anyone. So the theological term they use specifically kind of for this is aseity. It's a quality or state of being of self-existent, self-deprived, or self-originated. And so here is that God is not caused or created by anything. This is important. I mean, again, I think we often assume this, but in the ancient Near East, where the gods were actually kind of caused or created by each other, typically in torment and in war, and often with a lot of infighting kind of going on. That here we have the God who just is. There's nothing that caused him. And the God who has all power, there's nothing above him. And then we have the aspect that God is transcendent. Often people will use the categories of, say, like transcendent or immanent, so being close to us. So many of world religions kind of camp out in the area of transcendent. So God who is holy, God as majestic, God who is far and distant from us, and who are very devout in all of that. And so one of the beauty of within our faith is that we also learn that God is near, that he's close to us, as close as our heart beating with us. Now, what I find is that for some of us is that we easily kind of slide to different extremes. And so sometimes we kind of slide to this place where we believe in God, but it's God who's out there, God who's holy and majestic, and often kind of feeling kind of the weight of trying to follow this holy God. Or we slide over here to the other side where this is God, like Jesus, my buddy, who's my friend. Which is true. I mean, this is how Jesus described himself to the disciples, calling them as friends. But this is the creator of the universe, the one who holds all things in his hands, the one who has all power and control, who is far, but also who is near. And I don't think it's a tension that we're trying to hold, but rather it's a mystery that we swim in. And the greater we understand the transcendent nature of who he is, the greater that we just revel in the fact that he is with us. And then related to that, second, is that an eternal and transcendent God helps us trust and hope in him. So going back to that line, the greater is our God, greater is our faith. And so the more that we see who God is and the transcendent nature of who he is, and that he is eternal, that he's not capricious or fickle or changing upon us, the more that we can trust in him. That when God commissioned Moses to go rescue the Israelites, that he could believe that this is the God who would. That he could hope in him, and similar as we can hope in him. And then related to this is the inexhaustible love and grace of God. I sometimes will hear from people where they'll say that, I don't think God could actually forgive me because, I've done some really hard things. And in some way, what we're saying is that God's love and grace is limited. And as we worship an eternal God, we also worship one where his love and grace is inexhaustible, and that he can forgive us, and he can cleanse us from all wrong. And then lastly, is that an eternal and transcendent God satisfies our deepest longings. Satisfies our deepest longings. So another mic drop from A.W. Tozer. And so he put it this way. He says, to be made for eternity and forced to dwell in time is for mankind a tragedy of huge proportions. All within us cries for life and permanence. And everything around us reminds us of mortality and change. Yet that God has made us of the stuff of eternity is both a glory yet to be realized and a prophecy yet to be fulfilled. And for some of you, maybe it was a sudden loss of a loved one. Your heart ached. And you cried out, like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel fair. And the reason is because you have been created by an eternal God, one who longs for eternity and longs for life and permanence. And so this is the one who satisfies our deepest longings for him. So here we have Yahweh, the eternal and transcendent one, who commissions Moses to go, to rescue his people out of slavery. And I think that in many ways that God commissions us to go. And as he commissions us to go, he responds not with just an answer, he responds with his very self. Because we too are so easily kind of plagued with this question of like, well, who am I to do this? Who am I? And maybe it's in your place of work, or it's with your family, or it's with your neighbors, or maybe it's with going to the ends of the earth, because God calls us to be a part of that. By the way, our pastor Doug just preached in Turkey this morning, and him and Brian Klager are headed to Ethiopia to join up with our other mission partners there. So I encourage you to be praying for them this following week. So where is your go? Because we have a go for all of us. God's commissioning us to be a part of his rescue and restoration of this lost and broken world. That even in this Exodus narrative, in Exodus 19, God calls them out of Egypt to be a kingdom of priests. Everyone. To be a kingdom of priests. Worshipers of God. Those who are representing God to others. And we see actually in Revelation 1 the fulfillment of that, where he says, I made you a kingdom and priests. And so we're all called to be a part of this commission, to go. And yet I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're easily paralyzed or plagued by doubt. And we easily will say, who am I? You know, I think of seasons within my own life and remember when I went from the engineering world into seminary, and which, oh my goodness, like math and science to like writing papers. And I still remember, I was like first or second year, I got a paper back, and right on the top of the paper it says like, Adam, why don't you write as well as you speak? And it's like, ooh, let's take that knife out, and okay. And so there were many moments where I would kind of ask, like, who am I to be here? Who am I to do this or be a part of it? Or even remembering after getting married and then our firstborn there in the hospital and holding him and just marvel. And yet also these doubts of like, who am I to be his dad? To try to raise him up, to support him and encourage him and provide for him and point him to Jesus. Or I remember when my wife and I, we moved to Indonesia as missionaries and trying to learn the language and stumbling forward with the language and oh my goodness, just being humbled in that and often plagued by the question of who am I to be here? I don't feel like I'm enough to do this. And then to be honest with you, there's times even serving as a pastor where I might be walking alongside somebody and praying for healing or transformation or hope, and yet not experiencing it or seeing it, and then wondering, who am I to try to do this? And wondering, am I enough? Maybe you've wrestled with that as well, wondering if you are enough. Well, guess what? You're not. This is not the motivational speech here. You're not, but it's good news. Because God is enough. And that's not a cliche. God is enough. The great I am is enough. Whatever commission God has called you to, whatever struggle you might be in, He is enough. And He is with you in whatever you are walking through. So in closing, I want to just kind of talk about how do we respond to this? How do we walk in wonder and worship? How do we respond to His commission that's upon us? How do we be enamored by the eternal and transcendent one? And so two things I want to speak to. One is seeking transcendence. Second is beholding glory. So seeking transcendence, this is not talking about transcendental meditation or something like that, but rather is that if we worship the transcendent one, it's to go to spaces where we experience the transcendent one. Some might call it like liminal spaces, spaces where you feel even closer to God. As many of you know, I love hiking 14ers, being out in God's creation. I'll get on the top of a mountain. First, I'm exhausted, okay? And then I'm just like, oh. It's majestic. It's holy. It's beautiful. It's good. I love the way that the English poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning puts it. She goes, "Earth crammed with heaven and every common bush afire with God, but only he who takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries." Are we ones who take off our shoes and just marvel at God and his beauty and who he is? And then with that is that, are we beholding his glory? I was just flying back from Chicago about a week ago, and I was chatting with this gal who lives in the Denver area, and so just, kind of conversation comes out. I serve as a pastor and talking about hiking and things like that. So she makes the comment. She says, the mountains are my church. And I get that. I feel close to God in the mountains. And yet, it's so much more. And this is related to this beholding the glory piece. So imagine with me that if Moses hears this burning bush and he just sits there and he wonders and worships, but that's it. That's what it would be like to just go to the mountains. But thankfully, that's not it. That's not the end of it. God actually spoke to him. God revealed himself to him. And that's what God does to us. His very word reveals his character and his ways to us. And so to behold his glory is to be in his creation, or to go to your closet, or whatever it might be, but also to go to his word and allow it to speak to you and allow it to transform you. And so I'd encourage you to check out our Meditating on Scripture practice if you've never looked at it, so that you might wonder and worship the God who is eternal and is transcendent as well. So in closing, I want you guys to check out this video. And in it, you'll see some passages from Isaiah 40, so that we might revel in who he is, that we might wonder and worship as he speaks to us, wherever you are at, and whatever the go might look like.